30 years of bliss. Candlelight painted Martha's face with warm hues as she smiled across the intimate space between them. George's hand found hers, an instinctive gesture of comfort honed by 30 years. A lifetime compressed into a fleeting moment. "To us," he murmured, throat tight with emotion, lifting his glass of Merlot. "To 3 decades of everything." Her answering laugh, a familiar melody, still quickened his pulse. "Indeed. And to the next chapter, my love." The gentle chime of their glasses resonated softly. The savory scent of rosemary chicken, a testament to Martha's nurturing spirit, hung in the air. She was the anchor in his often turbulent existence, the hearth that warmed his soul. He savored the wine, its velvety texture a comforting balm. Dinner unfolded with easy grace. They spoke of quotidian joys and minor frustrations. Mrs. Peterson's champion blooms, the recalcitrant faucet finally subdued, the looming town council meeting. These were the interwoven threads that formed the rich tapestry of their shared life, the inconspicuous moments that built their enduring bond. Later, the table cleared and the dishwasher humming, a synchronized ritual perfected over years. They gravitated to the living room. George sank into his well-loved leather armchair, its contours molded to him, despite Martha's playful protests. She nestled into the sofa, the rhythmic click of her knitting needles a quiet counterpoint as she crafted a teal scarf. "Remember that Maine trip?" A mischievous glint sparked in George's eyes. "When we got hopelessly lost and wound up in that thing you called a bed and breakfast. It resembled a haunted house more than a hotel." Martha chuckled. "Don't exaggerate. It had character." "Character is certainly one way to put it," he retorted, grinning. "I'm convinced I saw a spectral guest." The next hour dissolved into a comfortable haze of reminiscence. They traversed the well-worn pathways of their shared past, guided by photographs. Wedding portraits, radiating youthful optimism. Images of their first home, a humble bungalow embraced by a vibrant garden. Snapshots of vacations, graduations, celebrations. Each picture a portal, unleashing a torrent of memories, laughter, and shared experiences. He pictured his clumsy proposal by the river, his hands trembling so violently he nearly fumbled the ring. The birth of their daughter, Sarah, the tidal wave of love and protectiveness that engulfed him. The quiet evenings, just the two of them, dissecting the world or reveling in comfortable silence. George stole a glance at Martha, her face bathed in the lamplight's soft glow, her silver hair gathered in a loose knot. He studied the delicate tracery of lines around her eyes, the gentle curve of her lips, the slight furrow of her brow as she concentrated on her knitting. He loved her, a love too profound for articulation. His thoughts drifted to their future, to growing old in tandem, to strolling hand in hand along windswept shores, to witnessing their grandchildren's triumphs. He envisioned them on the porch, sipping lemonade, recalling their life together, two souls forever entwined. The fire popped and hissed in the hearth, radiating a cozy warmth. The mingled scents of wood smoke and Martha's lavender potpourri created a soothing ambience, a portrait of domestic contentment. As Martha completed a row, she met George's gaze, her eyes shimmering with a love deeper than any sea. "You know," she murmured, "I wouldn't trade these past 30 years for all the riches in the world." A genuine smile bloomed on George's face, reaching his eyes. "Nor would I, my dear. Nor would I." He rose and moved to the sofa, kneeling before her. He enfolded her hand in his thumb gently tracing her skin. "To the next 30, he proposed, his voice thick with emotion. May they be blessed with equal measures of love, laughter, and joy." Martha leaned forward and kissed him, a tender, lingering kiss that conveyed volumes, a promise of forever, a reaffirmation of their unbreakable bond, a whisper of a future brimming with hope. He didn't realize then, as he held her close, as the fire danced merrily, that their serene existence was poised on the precipice of ruin. He couldn't fathom that the woman he adored, his partner for 3 decades, harbored a secret of such magnitude, such devastating consequence, that would obliterate everything they had built. He was blissfully unaware that their foundation of love rested upon a cleverly woven lie, a deception so complete that it would shatter his perception of reality. He had no premonition that his life was about to be irrevocably altered, that the love he cherished would turn to bitter ashes, that the future he had so fondly imagined would crumble into dust. He simply held her, inhaling the delicate fragrance of her lavender perfume, and whispered, "I love you, Martha, more than life itself." The words resonated in the stillness, a testament to a love he believed unassailable, a love about to face its ultimate trial. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows with a menacing cadence, a subtle omen of the tempest gathering on the horizon. Lost in the sanctuary of Martha's embrace, George remained oblivious. He raised his glass again, silently saluting a future that would never materialize. The shadows deepened, stretching and contorting. A chance encounter. The bell above the Blue Moon Diner chimed, heralding George's arrival. He cinched his faded jean jacket tighter, a shield against the crisp autumn air. The mingled aromas of sizzling bacon and aging coffee offered their customary solace. It was his ritual, a burger here, post-lumberyard shift, a well-worn groove. But tonight, a disquiet hummed beneath the surface, a feeling he couldn't quite name. He perched on a crimson stool at the counter, nodding to Earl, the cook, whose perpetually stained apron was as integral to the diner as its mosaic tile floor. "The usual, George?" Earl rumbled, already reaching for ground beef. "Yeah, Earl. Appreciate it." But his gaze snagged on a woman occupying the window booth. A stranger. Sunlight, diffused by the grimy pane, ignited her auburn hair, transforming it into a fiery nimbus. Laughter bubbled from her as she responded to her companion. From across the room, George felt the tug of her vitality, a captivating force that momentarily winded him. Her companion departed, leaving her solitary. An inexplicable urge propelled George. His burger, forgotten, cooled on the formica. He inhaled deeply, smoothed his thinning hair, and crossed the divide. "Excuse me," he began, his voice raspier than intended. I noticed you're sitting alone. I'm George." She looked up, eyes the color of liquid amber, and a smile blossomed, radiant enough to launch armadas. "Martha," she offered, her voice a lilting cadence that made his pulse quicken. "Though I'm just awaiting a friend. Mind if I offer some company in the meantime?" George asked, already easing into the opposite seat. Martha hesitated a fleeting moment. "I suppose that would be acceptable, George." Conversation flowed for what felt like fleeting minutes, yet stretched into hours. He discovered she was an artist, a recent arrival, seeking inspiration in the tranquil countryside. She spoke of her aspirations with an ardor that kindled a dormant ember within George, a sensation untouched since boyhood. He shared tales of the lumberyard, his affection for woodworking, the quiet gratification of shaping something real. They uncovered a shared passion for classic cinema, and a surprising mutual loathing of lima beans. By the time Martha's friend finally appeared, George felt an uncanny familiarity. He escorted her to her car, the night air redolent with pine and unspoken possibilities. As she prepared to leave, he blurted, Would you be free to go out sometime? Perhaps catch a flick?" Her smile broadened. "I would like that a great deal, George." Their inaugural rendezvous unfolded at the Starlight Drive-In, a relic of a bygone era. They shared a carton of popcorn, fingers grazing in the darkness, and chuckled at the abysmal special effects gracing the colossal screen. Afterward, they sought out a secluded vista point, the town lights shimmering below like scattered gems. Hours evaporated as they exchanged confidences and dreams under the expansive, indigo canopy. The ensuing dates became a cascade of shared mirth, stolen kisses, and an undeniable, deepening connection. Picnics unfolded by the murmuring river, hikes meandered through sun-dappled woodlands, and dances whirled to the twang of the local honky-tonks jukebox. George plummeted deeper into devotion with each sunrise, drawn to Martha's effervescent nature and unwavering optimism. She perceived a potential within him he'd never acknowledged, urging him to cultivate his passion for woodworking, to fashion beauty from the raw materials he'd long taken for granted. One pellucid, star-dusted evening, months after their serendipitous meeting at the Blue Moon Diner, George steered Martha back to their overlook. He halted the car, silenced the engine, and turned to face her. Only the trilling of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl disturbed the quiet. He clasped her hand, his palms suddenly slick. "Martha," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I realize our time together hasn't been extensive, but I can't envision a life devoid of you. You incite my laughter, provoke my thoughts, inspire me to strive for betterment." He produced a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside, nestled on a satin cushion, resided a simple band of gold. He presented it, the moonlight dancing on its surface. "Martha, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Time seemed suspended. He scrutinized her face, his heart hammering against his ribs, awaiting her response. Tears welled in her eyes, yet a radiant smile pierced through. "Yes, George," she breathed, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, then drew her close, kissing her under the silent observation of the cosmos. The world receded, and in that instant, only they existed, two souls interwoven, their future unfolding before them, luminous and full of promise. Little did he suspect that the very bedrock of that future was predicated on a fabrication, a concealed truth destined to one day shatter their reality and leave him questioning the foundations of his convictions. The Hardings, a family portrait. The wedding was small, held in Martha's hastily converted studio space above the bakery. Afterwards, they moved into George's modest, two-bedroom house. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The first few years were a blur of paint splatters, sawdust, and the constant scent of brewing coffee. Martha transformed the house, filling it with vibrant canvases and quirky sculptures cobbled together from found objects. George built sturdy shelves to hold it all, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he handled her delicate creations. Sarah arrived first, a tiny, demanding bundle with eyes that missed nothing. George, initially terrified of holding something so fragile, soon found himself singing her lumberjack lullabies, his voice surprisingly soft. David followed 3 years later, a placid, round-faced baby who seemed content just to observe the chaos around him. Family dinners were a nightly ritual. George, home from the lumberyard, would preside over the head of the table, carving the roast chicken with practiced ease. Martha, still smelling faintly of turpentine, would recount the day's artistic triumphs and tribulations. Sarah, even as a toddler, would dissect the conversation with laser-like precision, questioning every statement and challenging every assumption. David, usually lost in his own world, would occasionally chime in with a surprisingly insightful observation. The arguments, when they came, were short and sharp, usually sparked by Sarah's relentless questioning or George's stubborn refusal to admit he was wrong. But they always ended with a grudging apology and a shared plate of Martha's impossibly rich chocolate cake. Holidays were a symphony of controlled chaos. Thanksgiving meant the entire house smelling of sage and roasted turkey, with Martha insisting on a centerpiece made entirely of gourds and oddly shaped vegetables. Christmas was a riot of tinsel, handmade ornaments, and the ever-present threat of Sarah dismantling the entire nativity scene to understand its structural integrity. George, dressed in his annual Santa hat, would patiently rebuild it, while David retreated to a corner with a book, overwhelmed by the sensory overload. George, passing on his skills, tried to teach David the art of carpentry. But David, despite his best efforts, lacked his father's innate feel for wood. He'd fumble with the saw, splinter the planks, and generally create more sawdust than usable product. Frustration would simmer in George's eyes, a silent disappointment that David couldn't quite measure up. Martha, sensing David's distress, would intervene, suggesting they build birdhouses instead. Smaller, less demanding projects that allowed David to express his creativity without the pressure of perfection. Sarah, on the other hand, thrived under Martha's tutelage. Martha, with her unconventional approach to learning, encouraged Sarah's insatiable curiosity. She'd help her dissect complex equations, patiently explaining the underlying principles until Sarah's face lit up with understanding. They'd spend hours in Martha's studio, Sarah sketching furiously in her notebook while Martha worked on her latest masterpiece. The silence punctuated only by the scratching of charcoal and the occasional burst of laughter. As the children grew, the cracks in George and Martha's marriage became more visible. The arguments, once short and infrequent, became longer and more bitter. George's resentment simmered beneath the surface, fueled by Martha's increasingly erratic behavior and her growing detachment from family life. He felt like he was losing her, that she was slipping away into a world he couldn't understand. He tried to talk to her to bridge the widening gap, but she'd brush him off, claiming she was too busy, too stressed, too something. One evening, George found David sitting alone in the backyard swing set, his small face etched with worry. "Are you and Mom going to get divorced?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. George knelt down, his heart aching at the fear in his son's eyes. He pulled David close, holding him tight. "No, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're not going to get divorced. We're just going through a rough patch." But even as he said the words, he knew he wasn't entirely sure if they were true. The look on Martha's face, the distance in her eyes, haunted him. He saw a stranger where his wife once stood, and the truth threatened to drown him. The unspoken truth. Secrets of finances. Martha sat at the mahogany desk, the lamplight casting a warm glow on the scattered papers. Not bills, not exactly. More like investments. Stock certificates, cryptic letters from brokerage firms with imposing names. Sarah watched from the doorway, unseen. Martha always closed the door to the study, a habit that had begun subtly, then become a rigid ritual. Sarah leaned against the doorframe. The cool would contrast to the creeping unease in her stomach. Martha meticulously stacked the papers, lining up the corners with an almost obsessive precision. The rhythmic tap of her fingernail against the desk was the only sound. Then, she unlocked a small, ornate box. Sarah had never seen it before, and carefully placed the documents inside. Sarah cleared her throat. "Everything all right, Martha?" Martha jumped, a flicker of surprise. Or was it something else? Crossing her face before she smoothed it into her familiar, composed mask. "Sarah, I didn't hear you. Just paying some bills. You know how it is." "Actually," Sarah said, stepping into the room, "I don't. George usually handles the household finances." Martha chuckled, a brittle sound. "George has his art. I simply assist. He gets so flustered by numbers." She locked the box and tucked it away in a drawer. Sarah perched on the edge of the desk. "I was thinking about family history the other day. I was wondering about your parents. What were they like?" Martha busied herself straightening the pins in the ceramic holder. "They were good people. Simple. Hard-working." "What do they do?" Sarah pressed, trying to keep her tone casual. Martha paused, her back to Sarah. "It doesn't matter. They're gone now, and their lives were ordinary. Nothing to write home about." Sarah frowned. It wasn't just the vagueness. It was the subtle way Martha's shoulders had tensed, the slight tremor in her voice. "Everyone has a story, Martha. I like to know theirs. And yours before George." Martha turned, a hint of steel in her eyes. "My past is my past, Sarah. It has no bearing on who I am now. Besides," she softened her tone, placing a hand on Sarah's arm. "Why dredge up old memories? Let's focus on the present, on George and the children." Sarah pulled away gently. "I just thought it would be nice to know more about you. About David's heritage. Matzah's site. Perhaps another time. I'm rather tired. All these numbers, you know." She forced a smile, a dismissal barely veiled. Later that week, David was searching for a lost toy car under the bed in the guest room, a room Martha kept meticulously clean. He bumped his head, grumbling, and reached further, his fingers brushing against something papery. He pulled it out, a small, leather-bound album. He sat up, dusting it off. Old photographs. Sepia-toned images of people he didn't recognize. A young woman with dark hair and intense eyes stared back at him from one page. She looked vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place her. On the next page, a group of people stood in front of a building with a sign in a language he didn't understand. He was engrossed, turning the fragile pages carefully, when Martha appeared in the doorway. Her face paled. "David, what are you doing?" Her voice was sharp, almost panicked. He jumped, startled. "Just looking at these pictures." "Who are these people?" Martha snatched the album from his hands. "Those are old family photos. They're not important. You shouldn't be rummaging through things that aren't yours." "But," David stammered, confused by her reaction. "Who is that woman? Does she look like you?" Martha clutched the album to her chest. That's a relative. A distant relative. Now put that out of your mind. And please, David, don't mention this to your father." She hurried out of the room, leaving David staring after her, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. Why was she so upset? Why did she hide the pictures? And why did she tell him not to tell his father? That night, Sarah found David staring out the window, his face troubled. "What's wrong, David?" He hesitated, then poured out the story of the album and Martha's reaction. Sarah listened intently, her brow furrowed. "Did you recognize anyone in the pictures?" she asked. "No, but that woman, she looked a little like Martha. But younger. And different." Sarah was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on some distant point. "David," she said finally, her voice low, "I think there are things about your mother that we don't know." The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. David shivered, a cold dread creeping into his heart. It wasn't just his parents' strained silences, the clipped words, the unspoken resentments. It was something more, something hidden, something that felt profoundly wrong. And he had a feeling that whatever secrets Martha held, they were about to unravel. The box in the attic. Sunbeams, thick with airborne particles, speared the dimness of the attic. George hacked into his elbow, a gesture of surrender to the accumulated grime. Decades, perhaps, since he'd last ventured up here. Martha, with her relentless campaigns against clutter, typically managed the attic's chaotic ecosystem. He sought Christmas ornaments. Sarah yearned for an early holiday display, a fragile shield against the growing anxieties infesting their lives like the attic's pervasive mildew. He picked his way through shrouded furniture, monuments to forgotten trends, past bundled newspapers, their headlines fossilized in yellow, and around a teetering ziggurat of hat boxes. The plastic tubs brimming with tinsel and baubles were precisely where he remembered, tucked in the farthest recess. As he pivoted to descend, an anomaly snagged his attention. A wooden chest, secreted beneath the sloping roof, nearly vanished behind a rolled carpet. Not one of their utilitarian plastic bins, but a relic, somber wood clasped by verdigris-tinged brass. Unfamiliar. George usually cataloged such pieces. Martha, a devotee of antiques, delighted in their origins. But this felt alien. Aroused by a flicker of unfamiliar curiosity, he shuffled forward. He wrestled the rolled carpet aside, unleashing a plume of stale, earthy odor. The chest possessed surprising heft. Dragging it to the dormer window, he sought the meager illumination. With a groan from protesting hinges, he raised the lid. Within, reposing on decayed velvet, lay a cache of paper. Bundles of letters secured with faded ribbons, sepia-toned photographs, official-looking documents. He lifted a sheaf of letters. Translucent paper crinkled in his grasp. The ink, though faded, remained discernible. The addressee, Marianne Bellwether. Marianne Bellwether? A furrow deepened between his brows. Not Martha's family name. Peterson. Undeniably Peterson. He'd met her parents, hadn't he? Memories swam in a haze of years. A gentle, if delicate, pair during their courtship, now long departed. Martha rarely mentioned them. He selected a photograph. A young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, returned his gaze. Framed by raven curls, her eyes burned with fierce intelligence. Not precisely Martha. A ghost of resemblance lingered around the eyes, the jawline, yet the overall effect was divergent. Immature, of course, but also harder, more wary. He burrowed deeper. A birth certificate. The name, inscribed in elegant script, Marion Bellwether. Birthplace, Providence, Rhode Island. The date, identical to Martha's, but the nomenclature. A dizzy spell threatened his equilibrium. He sank onto the dusty floor, scattering the documents like fallen leaves. Another photo, Marion Bellwether in academic regalia, brandishing a diploma. The university's name blazed in gilded letters. A university utterly absent from Martha's biography. He shuffled through the letters again, fingers trembling now. Primarily personal missives, chronicling the minutiae of daily existence. Yet, as he absorbed their contents, a disquieting sensation began to permeate his being. The letters alluded to a former existence, a history Martha had never revealed. A life teeming with unknown individuals, unfamiliar locales, experiences wholly foreign to the woman he thought he understood. He unearthed a slim, leather-bound diary. The entries, terse and elusive, throbbed with anxieties. Skimming the pages, his heart hammered a frantic rhythm. Fragments surfaced, the flight, reimagined self, beginning anew. Flight? Reimagined self? What implications did these hold? He slammed the diary shut, the sharp report echoing through the stillness. The components refused to assemble into a coherent image. The Marion Bellwether of these artifacts bore no semblance to the Martha Harding he had cherished for 3 decades. Insecurity, like a creeping vine, began to strangle his marital bedrock. Implicit trust had always defined their bond. He had placed unwavering faith in her, in their collective narrative, in the shared existence they had forged. But now doubt gnawed relentlessly. He surveyed the attic, the forgotten artifacts of their shared timeline, the sunlit dust motes performing their silent ballet. He felt suspended on a precipice, gazing into an unfathomable void. Certainties had dissolved. Carefully, he returned the documents to their resting place within the chest and secured the lid. He maneuvered the box back beneath the eaves, concealing it from casual observation. He craved time to ruminate, to make sense of his findings. Understanding beckoned. One thing remained immutable. The world he had painstakingly constructed over 30 years teetered on the brink of collapse. Its foundations had fractured, its walls quivered, and he possessed no inkling of the revelations awaiting him when the dust finally settled. The Christmas decorations languished forgotten in the corner. Confrontation and denial. George hauled the antique strongbox down from the attic, its weight a constant reminder against his leg. It landed on the living room floor with a muffled thump, the sound magnified in the house's stillness. Martha was at her painting class, or so she claimed. In his mind, it was more likely a rendezvous at that downtown gallery. Resentment, sharp and cutting, eclipsed the bewildered anxiety of his attic discovery. He sprung the chest open, releasing a cloud of aged paper and dust. Spreading the contents across the coffee table, he arranged them like exhibits. Marion Bellwether's birth certificate, yellowed portraits of a woman with Martha's bone structure, but a far more predatory gaze. Cryptic letters he couldn't decode. He pictured confronting her, demanding answers. He had to. When Martha finally appeared, redolent with the sharp tang of turpentine, George sat like a judge in his armchair, overseeing the tableau of secrets on the coffee table. "George, what's all this about?" she inquired, a weary note in her voice that grated on him. Her silk scarf slithered off the coat, rack like liquid light. He indicated the table's contents. "Found this stuff upstairs, in the old strongbox." Martha's eyes darted across the displayed items, her face a blank canvas. Picking up the birth certificate, her fingers traced the delicate script. "Marion Bellwether," she breathed, almost inaudibly. "Who is she, Martha?" George's voice was a taut string. "And why was her life hidden in our attic?" She exhaled, a sigh that seemed to carry decades of unspoken words. "Oh, George, not this melodrama." "Melodrama? I'm seeing this for the first time. Spare me the coyness. Martha." She drifted toward the fireplace, leaning against the mantel, radiating an unnerving composure. Marianne was an invention, a character I inhabited years ago in my art, long before you. He gaped at her, dumbfounded. An invention? An entire identity, birth certificate, and all, is just some artistic conceit. He snatched up a photograph, the woman's piercing eyes seeming to bore into him. This feels like more than experimentation, Martha. This reeks of a double life. It was a means of exploring facets of myself, George. Artists do that. I was young, unfettered. It was ages ago. She tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, her gaze averted. And those letters? He brandished the stack of brittle, yellowed envelopes. What was the experiment there? Some elaborate code? Who received these missives? Just friends. From art school. We communicated in silly ciphers. Childish games. Her flippant tone was like striking a match to kindling. Games? 30 years of marriage. Martha, and you dismiss this as some juvenile pastime? This is about my life. Our life. He rose, fists tight at his sides, the air humming with suppressed fury. Don't raise your voice, George. You're unsettling me. Her voice, barely audible, trembled slightly. He inhaled deeply, wrestling for control. He needed to understand, and shouting wouldn't unlock the truth. Just be honest, Martha. Please. Who was Marianne Bellwether? She met his gaze, her eyes a mosaic of defiance, and something unreadable, perhaps apprehension. I told you, George. She was a facet of me, one I shed long ago. Then why the secrecy? Why bury this for all these years? She hesitated, her lips thinning into a bloodless line. Because I feared your reaction. You're such a grounded man, George. You wouldn't comprehend the allure of fantasy, the need for escape. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Escape? From what, Martha? From me? From us. No, George, not from you. Simply from the weight of reality. At times, it's crushing. He searched her face, and for the first time, saw a stranger. The woman he thought he knew, the woman he had cherished for 3 decades, had seemingly evaporated, replaced by a figure both enigmatic and untouchable. The scent of turpentine, once a comforting affirmation of her creative spirit, now felt like a suffocating shroud. I don't believe you, Martha, he stated, his voice devoid of inflection. I don't believe a word of it. Her eyes widened, and for a fleeting instant, he thought he glimpsed genuine remorse. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, supplanted by the same impenetrable facade she'd worn throughout their exchange. Then I've nothing more to offer, George. She turned away, walking towards the window. The waning sunlight etched long shadows across her features, obscuring them, making her seem even more remote. He knew, with a cold certainty that settled in his bones, that this was only the prologue. The chest hadn't just exposed a secret. It had cleaved the gulf between them, a chasm threatening to consume everything he held dear. The truth, in all its complexity, remained elusive, lurking just beyond the light, waiting to be brought into the open. And he would unearth it, regardless of the consequences. The private investigator. The building housing Harding Investigations was a monument to neglect. Peeling paint clung to the brick facade like stubborn scabs, and a single window displayed a dusty collection of outdated newspapers and a chipped ceramic bulldog. George hesitated on the cracked sidewalk, the late afternoon sun glinting off the tarnished brass of the entrance. He checked the address scribbled on the back of a business card, a card he'd found tucked away in a seldom-used compartment of his wallet. Harding Investigations. It was now or never. He pushed open the heavy door, a discordant squeal announcing his arrival. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale coffee and something vaguely chemical, like old film developing fluid. The office was small, barely larger than a walk-in closet, dominated by a scarred wooden desk piled high, with files and ashtrays overflowing with cigarette butts. Behind the desk sat a man who looked like he'd lost a fight with a particularly grumpy badger. Rick Harding was a study in contrasts. A sharp, intelligent gaze peered out from beneath a perpetually furrowed brow, framed by thinning gray hair that seemed to defy any attempt at combing. He wore a rumpled suit that had probably seen better days, and a tie loosened just enough to suggest a rebellious streak beneath the world-weariness. He didn't bother to stand. "Harding," he grunted, his voice raspy from years of nicotine abuse. "You're either lost or desperate. Which is it?" George swallowed, the dryness in his throat suddenly pronounced. "George Peterson. I called earlier." Harding's eyes narrowed slightly. "Right, the domestic disturbance. Have a seat." He gestured vaguely towards a rickety chair that looked as though it might collapse at any moment. George sat gingerly. He spent the next half hour laying out his story, the words tumbling out in a rush of anxiety and confusion. He spoke of Martha, their life together, the discovery of the strongbox, the photographs, the alias. He carefully avoided mentioning the possibility of a crime, focusing instead on the unsettling nature of the deception. Harding listened in silence, his expression unreadable. He occasionally tapped a pen against a notepad, but didn't interrupt. When George finally trailed off, exhausted and emotionally drained, Harding simply leaned back in his chair, the springs groaning in protest. "So, you want me to find out who this Marion Bellwether really is?" he asked, his voice flat. "Yes," George said, relief flooding him. "I need to know. I have to know what my wife has been hiding from me all these years." Harding sighed, the sound heavy with cynicism. "People hide things, Mr. Peterson. That's what they do. Usually it's something they're ashamed of, or something they think will hurt the people they care about. But 30 years?" George's voice cracked. Harding shrugged. Time doesn't erase secrets. It just lets them fester. He named his price, a figure that made George wince, but he agreed readily enough. He had to know the truth, whatever the cost. The next morning, Harding began his investigation. He started with the photographs George had provided, meticulously scanning them for any clues. The backdrop, the style of clothing, even the type of film used, everything was a potential lead. He spent hours at the local library, poring over old newspapers and microfiche record from the areas where the photographs were taken. He tracked down old theater acquaintances of Martha's, people she had mentioned in passing over the years. He interviewed them, asking subtle questions about her past, about any unusual behavior, about anyone she might have known before she became Martha Peterson. Most of them remembered her fondly, describing her as talented and vivacious, but none could offer any concrete information about a Marion Bellwether. Days bled into weeks. Harding followed a trail of breadcrumbs, each one leading him further into Martha's past. He discovered old addresses, traced bank accounts, even managed to obtain copies of some of her early artwork, signed Marion Bellwether. The picture that was emerging was of a woman who had carefully constructed a new identity, erasing the old one as completely as possible. One afternoon, Harding called George. "I think I found something," he said, his voice unusually grave. "Meet me in my office tomorrow morning. 8 sharp." George's heart pounded in his chest. After weeks of agonizing uncertainty, he was finally going to learn the truth. But a knot of dread tightened in his stomach. He had a feeling that whatever Harding had uncovered, it wasn't going to be easy to hear. He spent a restless night, tossing and turning, haunted by fragmented memories of Martha and the looming shadow of Marion Bellwether. He didn't know it yet, but the life he thought he knew was about to be irrevocably shattered. The truth revealed. The heavy manila envelope felt like a lead weight as Rick Harding propelled it across the mahogany. Luncheon chatter filled the Gilded Lily, a discordant backdrop to the personal cataclysm about to erupt for George. "It's all there, Peterson," Rick rumbled, avoiding eye contact, his attention fixed on the amber liquid swirling in his glass. The genesis of it all, birth records, medical history, everything. George's hand hovered. He wrestled with the urge to tear into it, to uncover the truth, warring with the equally strong impulse to bolt, to deny reality. 30 years with Martha. 3 decades etched with laughter, confided secrets, lives interwoven. Could a shared history truly be contained within this single packet? Drawing a breath, the delicate fragrance of lilies did little to soothe the turmoil brewing within. A decisive motion, and the seal was broken. A birth certificate lay on top. The name screamed at him, Michael Bellwether. Male. He stared, comprehension failing him. Michael? Martha? It defied logic. A mistake, surely. A cruelist. He scrambled for the other documents. Clinical notes, detailing consultations, diagnoses, culminating in surgery. Gender confirmation. The sterile language, detached and precise, conjured a grotesque tableau in his mind. A ringing filled his ears, muting the elegant murmur of the restaurant to a distant drone. His face paled, his skin growing slick with cold sweat. He lifted his gaze to Rick, eyes wide, pleading for reassurance. This can't be true. Rick sighed, finally meeting his gaze. A fleeting expression of something akin to sympathy crossed his features, quickly masked. It is Peterson. Every last detail. George's eyes returned to the documents, the clinical jargon blurring before him. Martha's name was omnipresent, inextricably linked to Michael. His Martha. A rush of memories assaulted him, each now warped, sullied, fundamentally wrong. He pictured their wedding, Martha a vision in white, her hand trembling as she slid the ring onto his finger. He'd attributed it to nerves. Now he questioned everything. The birth of Emily flashed before him. The incandescent joy of holding his daughter, watching Martha's tender embrace. Was that tenderness a fabrication? Had his entire existence been built on a foundation of lies? He saw Martha at her easel, the vibrant hues mirroring the complex emotions he now understood she had kept concealed. He recalled her reluctance to discuss her past, her veiled references to a troubled youth. He had respected her privacy, never probing, never suspecting this deception. A wave of searing anger washed over him. Betrayal. The word felt woefully inadequate to encompass the inferno raging within. He had given her his life, his trust, his very soul, and she had rewarded him with this elaborate charade. He shuddered, recalling their intimacy, the years of shared passion, the palpable connection that had always seemed so genuine. Had it all been a performance? A calculated manipulation to maintain appearances? The thought was unbearable, a knife twisting in his gut. He shoved the envelope away, as if it emanated a toxic aura. Why? He croaked, his voice strained. Why would she do this to me? Rick shrugged, indifferent. People have their reasons, Peterson. Fear, perhaps. A belief you wouldn't understand. Maybe she simply desired a different existence. A different existence? George echoed, the words dripping with acid. At what cost? To me? To Emily. He surged to his feet, knocking over his water glass. Ice cubes cascaded across the table, glittering like fallen stars. He ignored the mess, compelled to escape the suffocating truth. Where do you think you're going? Rick demanded, his tone edged. George remained silent, pivoting sharply and striding from the restaurant, leaving Rick Harding alone amidst the lunchtime throng, the damning envelope abandoned on the polished surface. The scent of lilies, once enchanting, now felt suffocatingly sweet. The world he had known, the life he had cherished, lay in shattered fragments. And he was adrift, without a compass, without a map. A moment of rage. The car was a mobile confessional, each taillight a scarlet pulse mirroring the frantic beat in his temples. He drove, directionless, only propelled by a need for escape. From Rick Harding's self-satisfied smirk, the restaurant's clattering pretension, from the abhorrent revelation that threatened to unravel his very being. He found himself at the house, a Pavlovian response after 3 decades. 30 years of homecoming to Martha, even though that haven now reeked of deception. He slammed the door, a thunderclap in the quiet evening. Foregoing the walkway, he plowed through the flower bed, trampling the vibrant heads of Martha's cherished petunias. The front door yielded without resistance. He discovered her in the studio, immersed in the cool, northern light. Brush in hand, back to him, she stood before her easel. The air, usually a comforting mix of turpentine and linseed, now felt like a noxious cloud choking him. Martha, he rasped, his voice a foreign, guttural sound. She pivoted, surprise fleeting across her features, replaced by a familiar, almost maternal concern. "George, what is it? You look dreadful." "Do I?" The words burst out, laced with venom. "Perhaps it's because my existence has been a fabrication." Her brow furrowed, the brush still poised. "George, what on earth are you talking about?" The containment shattered. A tidal wave of fury, betrayal, and agonizing hurt surged, a wound opening in his soul. "Marianne Bellwether," he bellowed, the name echoing in the high-ceilinged space. "That's who you are, isn't it? The masquerade you've maintained all along." Her complexion drained of color, the brush tumbling from her grasp. The ensuing silence amplified its fall. He registered a flicker of stark terror in her eyes, a sight unseen until now, and it stoked the inferno within him. "How could you?" he challenged, his voice trembling with the force of his emotions. "How could you perpetrate this? On us? 30 years, Martha. 30 years built on a foundation of falsehoods." She recoiled, hands rising in a gesture of defense. "George, please, just let me explain." "Explain? What narrative could possibly justify this perfidy?" He conjured their wedding vows, the memory of holding her close, the birth of their children, every shared embrace, all resting on a bedrock of deceit. He advanced, his vision blurring, fueled by incandescent rage. "Explain what? How you duped me? How you manipulated me into believing a fiction? How you presented yourself as someone entirely different?" He watched her reach for an object on the nearby table, an antique pistol used in her still-life arrangements. A relic from her grandfather, always considered a harmless ornament. Or so he had assumed. That single action ignited a spark within him, a desperate, irrational impulse to prevent her, to suppress her voice, to obliterate the truth before it utterly consumed him. He surged forward, wresting the pistol from her grasp. It possessed an unexpected heft, cold and unyielding in his grasp. He leveled it at her, his hand quaking uncontrollably. "Don't," she pleaded, her eyes wide pools of raw fear. "George, please don't do this." He was lost, acting on instinct alone. The deafening report of the gun, the jarring recoil, the look of utter disbelief etched across Martha's face as she slumped to the floor were the only anchors in the chaos. The pungent reek of gunpowder permeated the air, nauseatingly sharp. The subsequent stillness was more profound than the detonation. He stood transfixed, his mind struggling to process the enormity of his actions. The pistol slid from his nerveless fingers, landing with a soft thud beside her. A spreading crimson stain blossomed across her chest, a macabre flower against the pristine white of her blouse. Her eyes remained open, fixed on the distant ceiling. "Martha," he croaked, his voice barely audible. He sank to his knees beside her, trembling hands reaching to caress her face. Her skin was icy, slick with a cold sweat. "Martha, I didn't intend to," he stammered, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I didn't. I swear I didn't." But the words were hollow, swallowed by the crushing weight of his guilt. He had obliterated everything. He had murdered her, their shared existence, and a part of himself died along with her. He cradled her head, rocking back and forth, a mournful sound tearing from his throat. He had craved honesty, and now he was drowning in it. The truth, a hydra of horror, exceeded any nightmare he could have conceived. The studio, once a haven of creativity and affection, was now a sepulcher. And he, George Peterson, was a killer, a spouse who extinguished his wife's life in an uncontrollable, unforgivable burst of fury. The brutal reality crashed down around him, leaving him struggling for breath in a sea of sorrow. Their story, their legacy, had reached its devastating end, all because of a secret, a lie that had poisoned everything. The weight of the truth. The antique pistol rested on the parquet, a dormant instrument of irreversible change that had cleaved George's life in two with a single, thunderous report. Police arrived swiftly, sirens slicing through the stillness that had settled over the house like a shroud. George offered no resistance. He remained fixed, a tableau of shock, observing the reflected dance of emergency lights on the polished floor, the pungent reek of burnt powder stinging his nostrils. The interrogation room felt clinical, the hum of fluorescent tubes a relentless drone. Across the table sat District Attorney Evelyn Reed, her gaze flinty and unforgiving. No solace was offered, no empty reassurances, only stark, pointed inquiries. "Mr. Harding, walk me through the events leading to your wife's demise." George's voice emerged, raspy and broken. "It was accidental. I never intended for it to happen." Reed's brow arched, skepticism etched into every line of her face. "A mishap involving an antique firearm? One recovered from a secure display cabinet." He groped for coherence, for a semblance of the truth he could articulate, a jumbled mess within his mind. "We were arguing about so many things. I picked up the gun. I can't explain why. It just happened." Reed advanced slightly, her eyes boring into his. "You discovered that your wife had been living under an assumed name. Is that correct?" "Marianne Bellwether. A history she kept buried for 3 decades." The words hung, accusations veiled as questions. George squeezed his eyes shut. A fractured image of Martha and of Marianne swam before him. The statement resonated with accuracy, but it lacked the full picture. The trial transformed into a media spectacle. "Betrayed husband murders wife after stunning revelation," blared the headlines. Evelyn Reed crafted a portrait of George as a man overcome by fury, driven to commit a heinous act by betrayal and injured vanity. She presented the evidence meticulously: the firearm, the absence of forced entry, George's faltering confession, and the excavated details of Martha's concealed identity. Sarah, her complexion ashen, testified for the prosecution. Her voice wavered as she recounted the palpable tension in their home, the ceaseless friction that had defined her parents' relationship for years. "My father is a decent man," she stated, her focus fixed distantly, beyond the courtroom's confines. "But he has a temper, and my mother held back secrets that ultimately destroyed them." Her words carried remarkable weight, not for their content, but for the palpable emotion underscoring them. She neither condemned nor excused her father. She simply peeled back the layers of her truth, honed through years of quiet observation and youthful despair. David sought George out in jail before the trial concluded. He faced his father, separated by the cold barrier of reinforced glass. A palpable sense of loss radiated from him, his normally sanguine nature replaced by haunted melancholy. "Dad, why did you do it?" George avoided his son's scrutiny. "I honestly don't know, David. I just don't know." The gravity of his deed pinned him, an unbearable weight of guilt and profound regret. He had decimated everything cherished, all because of a past he struggled to comprehend and a secret he refused to forgive. The jury was in deliberation for days. The final verdict, when spoken, was almost a certainty: guilty of manslaughter. George received a sentence of 15 years imprisonment. Prison was a bleak landscape of bare concrete and unforgiving steel, a world divorced from the comfort he once enjoyed. Each day bled into a monotonous procession of meals, mandated tasks, and the gnawing isolation of his cell. Even sleep brought little solace, his dreams haunted by visions of Martha, the echo of the gunshot, the life irrevocably squandered. Sarah visited sporadically, though her visits felt stilted, overly formal. She recounted fragmented news of the outside world, of her professional life, the early steps toward carving a life anew. She avoided any mention of her mother. He sought to decipher her underlying motivations, her anxieties, her aspirations. Yet, the more he delved, the more elusive her persona became. He turned to writing, filling countless notebooks with his inner thoughts, his lingering regrets, his cherished memories of Martha. He chronicled their early days, the whirlwind romance, the shared aspirations. He explored the fissures that had gradually emerged in their bond, the unvoiced resentments, the widening gulf between them. He recounted the night he uncovered Marianne's secret, the initial shock, the white-hot anger, the profound sense of betrayal. And he documented the instant his finger tightened around the trigger, the defining moment that had shattered everything. The years eroded. George aged behind bars, his hair bleached by time, his posture stooped beneath the weight of years. The consuming anger that had fueled him in the early days slowly waned, eventually giving way to an overwhelming sense of sorrow. He had forfeited everything: his wife, his family, his autonomy, his very existence. He was left solely with the burden of the truth, a truth from which there was no escape.